Before we get started, there'll be spoilers for the 1000-Year Blood War arc of Bleach in the video to come. As the final saga of Bleach, the 1000-Year Blood War arc features the biggest roster of characters yet. Heroes and villains converge from all corners of the story, coming together for the ultimate battle to decide the fate of the Bleach universe. Despite having so many characters to juggle, Kubo did a pretty good job with the extended cast, ensuring most of them, both familiar faces and brand new, had a chance to shine. But inevitably, some do better than others. Some characters were blessed by Kubo, given incredible treatment throughout the final arc, whether they received a wonderful, detailed character arc themselves, or participated in some of the arc's biggest and best battles, or hell, maybe they got both. Maybe they were the complete package in the 1000-Year Blood War arc. And so in today's video, I'm going to rank the 13 best characters of the 1000-Year Blood War. Those that I feel are the biggest winners of the immense battle between Shinigami and Quincy. Like I said earlier, I'll be judging this list on numerous criteria. What kind of development did these characters get? How many fights were they involved in, and were they of a high quality? How much panel time did they get overall, and perhaps most important, what kind of an impact did they have, both on the narrative and the readership? What kind of a lasting legacy did their time in the 1000-Year Blood War arc leave? And yes, as this is the 2024 edition of this video, I will be taking into account the current state of the anime as well. So without further ado, let's kick things off with a few honourable mentions. My first honourable mention is definitely a personal pick, but I really think this character completely comes alive in the final arc in a way that he never did before. And of course that's Akon, at the time the 3rd seat of the 12th Division. You have to understand that before the 1000-Year Blood War arc, Akon was barely a character. He was a recognisable face amidst a sea of background characters, and that was mostly it. However, come the final arc, Kubo decided to promote him in a big way, humanising Akon and placing him right in the centre of the action. Effectively heading up the 12th Division and all communications during the first Quincy invasion, Akon's quick thinking and decisive nature helped keep the Gotei 13 alive in their darkest hour, and it was Akon's choice to not only get in touch with Ichigo, but to go out onto the battlefield to try and rescue him when it was clear the enemy had got to him first. I remember being so consistently impressed with Akon during the early stages of the war. This was not a character I or really anybody else cared about at all until the first Quincy invasion rolled around, and while his importance does taper off a little bit, Kubo keeps him around, even giving him a well-deserved promotion to vice captain at the end of the series, ensuring we will probably see more of him in the future. My next honourable mention is none other than the captain of the 10th Division, Toshiro Hitsugaya. 3 years ago, Hitsugaya was the only honourable mention on my list, and my opinion regarding his involvement hasn't really changed. There's no denying that Hitsugaya gets a lot to do in the final arc. He's initially a victim of the Bankai stealing subplot before turning the tables on Kangdu in spectacular fashion. And considerably later on, he's involved in the all-out final brawl against Gerard Valkyrie, even displaying his new completed Bankai in a nice piece of development for the character. The reason he doesn't actually make the list, though, is that despite his hefty panel time, Hitsugaya spends the vast majority of this arc, of that panel time, being decimated in one form or another. Whether it's Bazby totally walking all over him in one of the arc's most brutal beatdowns, to Giselle taking Hitsugaya under her control and forcing him to do her bidding. It's pretty tough out there for the little captain. He makes the spot as an honourable mention because he does have an impact on the war. He's all over it, in fact. It's just that it doesn't go very well for him. In fact, it goes so badly for him most of the time that it's really impossible to call him a winner. And finally, the last honourable mention is perhaps the most contentious of the three, and that's Sternritter B. the Balance Ugram Hashwolf. In my opinion, Hashwolf is almost there as far as a great new character introduced in the arc goes. I enjoy so much about him. He has a great design, a lot of screen time, and a cool antagonistic relationship with Uryu. But Haschwalth really lacks impact, in my opinion, which is particularly egregious when you consider that A, he is the second most foremost villain of the arc, and just how many chapters he actually appears in. I think it's something like 54 out of a total 206 or so of the arc, and yet, what does he spend that time actually doing? Essentially just standing around and talking for the most part. His fight with Bazz-B is pretty good, but it's mostly a vehicle for an admittedly excellent flashback, while his long-awaited duel with Uryu turns out to be a bit of a disaster. Haschwalth is on the cusp of making it onto the list, and I'm just waiting to see what the anime does with his character before deciding whether or not to tip the scales in his favour. For now, he remains an honourable mention, a new character that came so close to greatness. Alright, but moving on to the list proper, up first we have one of the most terrifying enemies of the arc, Sternritter F, the Fear Asnod. If you were a weekly reader of Bleach during the opening chapters of the Thousand Year Blood War arc, you will remember that no character, not even Yhwach arc, represented the Vandenreich quite like Asnod right out of the gate. Asnod made a massive, lasting impression on the readership thanks to his incredible design, but even more so than that, his gut-wrenching battle with Byakuya, resulting in the captain's devastating defeat, the likes of which we had never seen before. Really, Asnod feels like one of the few Sternritter who can actually stand shoulder to shoulder with some of Bleach's most iconic villains. He's remarkably fleshed out with 2 full fights, both of which are pretty good under his belt, and a small flashback to boot. Asnod's impact on the arc as a whole is pretty small, hence why he finds himself here in 13th, but there's no denying that of all the new characters introduced here, Asnod is easily one of the best, quickly entering the pantheon of Bleach's most famous bad guys. In 12th place, we have another totally new character for the arc, the leader of the Zero Division and the monk who calls the true name Ichibei Hyosobe. Sure, the anime delivered big time for characters like Senjumaru and Tenjiro, but Ichibei remains the greatest of the bunch. Creepy and inhuman, Ichibei's arrival helped to fill a void in the lore and backstory of the Bleach universe. As potentially the first ever Shinigami and the emissary for the Soul King himself, Ichibei is a mighty figure of grand importance and goes some way to helping us piece together the mystery of Ryo and the splitting of the worlds. On top of that, Ichibei helped train Ichigo, Rukia and Renji, all 3 of them coming away from the Royal Palace with amazing new abilities that left their mark on the battlefield. Ichibei also had one of the best fights of the arc in the source material, duking it out with Yhwach on the walkway to the palace in a fight that was so epic, it honestly felt a little bit like fanfiction. Until the anime came around, Ichibei was the sole standout star of the Zero Division and was the only one of the 5 who felt like he actually deserved to be there. While the others have now been given their dues, Ichibei remains a staggeringly cool addition to the cast. Now, I'm just hoping the anime continues to flesh him out a bit more. In 11th place, we have a character who flew almost completely under the radar until the Thousand Year Blood War arc, before being totally transformed to such a degree that she'll never be looked at the same again. Of course, I'm talking about the captain of the 4th Division, Retsu Unohana. Now, an argument could be made that due to her early death in the arc, Unohana never really reached her full potential and could even be described as a wasted character. And while I wouldn't necessarily dispute that, she remains a winner in the arc nonetheless, undergoing one of the craziest character transformations in the entire series. The revelation that Unohana was in fact the first captain of the 11th Division from 1,000 years ago, and even crazier, the first ever Kenpachi, was masterfully handled in the story and was one of the biggest and best twists in all of Bleach, completely blowing the doors wide open for this character and, frankly, making her immeasurably more interesting. Her battle with Kenpachi, while short, was also one of the best fights of the arc, and laid the foundations for his own fantastic development journey to come. Really, the only reason Unohana comes in so low on the list is because of her untimely death. Even though she accepted it and even welcomed it, it was a shame to see her go so soon. Kicking off the top 10 on this list, we have another member of the Sternritter. Sternritter H. the Heat Bazby. As our resident new hothead villain, Bazby had pretty big shoes to fill, but I think that for the most part he succeeds. Bazby will never have quite the same relevance as characters like Renji or Grimmjow due to his lack of a relationship with Ichigo, but as far as supporting antagonists of the arc go, Bazby is far and away one of the best. With 2 fights under his belt, a great development arc, tons of screen time, and one of the most emotional, surprising, and humanizing send-offs of any villain in Bleach, let alone just the Sternritter, Bazby is a standout winner of the 1000-Year Blood War arc. Despite running on a similar trajectory to Haschwalth, I think Bazby sticks the landing a lot better than his stoic counterpart. Both of Bazby's fights are entertaining and shown in full, and his Shrift is a remarkably creative application of an otherwise pretty common ability. Bazby may never end up as popular or iconic as the likes of Grimmjow, but I think he's just as good of a character, if not a little better in fact. Now, I'm going to cheat a little bit with these next 2 entries and include 2 characters per spot, but there's a reason for that. Within both of these entries, the 2 characters involved undergo very similar journeys, to the point where I feel like they are both winners for essentially the same reason. First up, in 9th place, we have Rukia Kuchiki and Renji Abarai, the vice-captains of squads 13 and 6 respectively during the arc. While both Rukia and Renji have remained major characters since their initial introductions so very long ago, there's no denying they both fell to the wayside somewhat in the latter half of the Arrancar arc. However, the 1000-Year Blood War arc sees them both soar back into relevance with the help of their divine training in the Royal Palace, before the 2 Shinigami score well-deserved and much-needed decisive victories over powerful enemies, with Rukia freezing Asnot and Renji incinerating Masked Emasculin. Honestly, while I consider them both to be winners in this context, Renji definitely needed the boost more than Rukia, but either way it was good to see the 2 of them on top from the second invasion onwards. The reason they're at 9th is that while their stars shine brightly for a bit, they do fade again later on. And then in the 8th spot we have another duo, Isshin and Masaki Kurosaki, Ichigo's parents. Masaki had never been much of a character prior to the final arc due to her being dead and all, while Isshin's mysterious Shinigami abilities were a huge secret that needed answering, and we waited for years to finally learn the truth. The questions were rampant. How was Isshin a Shinigami? Which division was he a captain of? When was he a part of the Gotei 13? And crucially, how did he come to meet and start a family with Masaki, a human? Well, in the 1000-Year Blood War arc, not only did Kubo finally deliver on those long-standing questions, but he opened the floodgates with the mini flashback arc Everything But the Rain, giving us the answers we had been waiting for in droves. Not only did Kubo deliver on the goods, but he did so in stunning fashion. Everything But the Rain is an excellent piece of self-contained writing, elevating Isshin's character while breathing a whole new lease of life into Masaki's. No pun intended. While I ultimately would have liked Isshin to do more in the present-day conflict as well, there's no denying that getting to learn so much about their relationship and their history was a huge boon to both Isshin and Masaki, making them both obvious winners of the arc. In 7th place, we have the final Sternritter to make the list, and yes, perhaps my bias is showing somewhat here, but I really do think that Sternritter D, the death-dealing Askin Naklavar, is a huge winner of the Thousand Year Blood War arc. Not only is Askin one of the most popular new characters of the arc, I would argue he is possibly one of the most popular new characters of the entire post-time skip story of Bleach. Although his role in the arc is to ultimately be a more straightforward antagonist than someone like Bazby, Askin fills that role wonderfully, with absolutely loads of screen time, a unique, engaging and almost meta personality that everyone fell in love with, and to top it all off, he has what is often considered to be one of the best fights of the entire arc against Kisuke, Yoruichi, and Grimmjow. The fact that Askin held on for so long in the story, despite being a relatively normal guy next to his godly counterparts, is perhaps a testament both to how much Kubo liked him and how good he was at what he did. Sure, maybe I am being swayed by my personal love for the character, but I honestly suspect much of the community would agree with him being on the list. He's given almost every advantage and is such a well-rounded character in comparison to probably 99% of other Sternritter, even going so far as to have his own motivation for following Yhwach that isn't just blind zealotry. Just missing out on a top 5 spot is none other than our main character, Ichigo Kurosaki, who has jumped quite a few places since I last made this list over 3 years ago. My opinion on how Ichigo fares in this arc fluctuates, and truly is a very difficult one to pin down. On the one hand, I think he has a good, strong part to play in the Thousand Year Blood War. Despite the arc feeling massive with a bloated cast and fights all over the place, Ichigo does still manage to have a through line of development, from being unable to protect the Soul Society to learning the truth about himself and his family, and then acquiring a brand new power that elevates him to where he truly ought to be. It feels like real growth. The Blade is Me, combined with Everything But the Rain as we talked about earlier, is a wonderful piece of development that helps Ichigo's character come full circle and completes his journey in a meaningful way that also makes sense. My biggest issue with the character in the Thousand Year Blood War arc, and why he doesn't climb any higher than this on the list, is that he just doesn't get enough big milestone moments or fights to really showcase that growth, and by the second half of the second invasion he's running around the place almost aimlessly, going back and forth between the Royal Palace in a ridiculous amount of time. And so that's why he doesn't make the top 5 for me. While I think Ichigo's development in this arc is perhaps some of the best he ever receives, finally answering many long-standing questions, his overall lasting impact on the arc leaves a bit to be desired for the main character. But outside of that, the arc does really good things for him, maturing him and allowing him to really step into the role of main character and finally feel like it fits him, if that makes sense. The anime has already added essentially an entire subplot for Ichigo that was missing in the source material, and I am very optimistic about the way they are describing him, maintaining that it is still his story at its core, so I'm hopeful it will keep building on his character over time. Okay, reaching the top 5, and we have Kisuke Urahara, the former captain of the 12th Division turned humble candy store owner. And these days, as of the Thousand Year Blood War arc, basically a secret field agent for the Soul Society. Yes, Kisuke finally steps into the big role he was born to play here in the Thousand Year Blood War arc, and I love it. With a war unfolding on all fronts, Kisuke becomes a frontline commander, actively researching how to reverse the Quincy's Bankai stealing plot, from his makeshift lab in Wako Mundo to taking charge in the Seireitei itself. It's a big deal that Kisuke spends basically the whole arc in the Soul Society. You really get the sense that after 100 years of exile, he's finally back in. Working alongside his former protege turned ambitious rival Mairi, the two masterminds help to coordinate the Shinigami's offensive. Honestly, Kisuke is such a driver of the plot in the Thousand Year Blood War arc, and you'll see that's a recurring theme throughout most of the top 5 of this list. Once the battleground has changed to the Royal Palace, it's Kisuke who sets things into motion, both working with Yoruichi to send Ichigo and the first wave of fighters up there, but then bringing the Gotei 13 and the Vizard together to prepare another assault when the world is quite literally on the brink. As mentioned in the Askin section of the video, Kisuke gets one of the best fights of the arc, and of course gets to revel in his long-awaited Bankai reveal. Although the Bankai reveal is a little rushed, I'm still confident in saying it was worth the wait, as Kisuke has one of the coolest and frankly best Bankai in the series. Kisuke's role in the Thousand Year Blood War arc is so prominent and so fitting that it's a damn shame Kubo couldn't fit him into the epilogue whatsoever. Frankly, it doesn't make sense, and it does hurt his ranking overall. After everything, before the Hell chapter came out where we at least got a mention of him, the last we saw of Kisuke was him collapsing in a puddle of blood, never to be heard from again. But regardless of the disappointing outcome, there's no denying Kisuke's reach is felt all throughout the arc. However, just pipping Kisuke to the 4th place spot, something that would no doubt make this character extremely happy, is the current captain of the 12th Division, Mayuri Kurotsuchi. What an unbelievable transformation for this character. Mayuri has stepped out of the supporting role and been thrust by Kubo into the limelight, becoming one of the arc's biggest characters from start to finish. Here in the Thousand Year Blood War arc, Mayuri finally becomes the captain he's always meant to be. Fighting and scheming in the name of the Seireitei, and not just for his own selfish interests. It's thanks to Mayuri's quick thinking that the Shinigami managed to have a headquarters at all amidst the rubble and ruin of their transformed Seireitei after he modifies his laboratory to keep shadows out, in doing so preventing the Quincy from entering. It was Mayuri who built the replica of Kukaku's cannon, helping Ichigo and the others head to the Royal Palace before he assists the other Shinigami in building the gate when the outlook seems dire. And yet Mayuri spends a lot of his time out in the field. He has 2 fights in the arc, which is pretty unusual for him, including one of the arc's very best, and even receives some meaningful development to his relationship with Nemu, resulting in a shockingly emotional payoff for an otherwise usually detestable character. And that's not all. Half of the captain-level fighters that fall in battle owe their lives to Mayuri, after he rescues Hitsugaya, Matsumoto, Rose, and Kensei from zombification before later saving Zaraki's life too, of all people. Mayuri's actions as part of the war effort are openly acknowledged by the cast. Hitsugaya thanks him personally, as do Ikkaku and Yumichika, showing just how much he's changed, how much they recognise that, and what he can do for the greater Seireitei when he really wants to fight for it. If that's not enough, how about a visual indicator of the scope of Mayuri's role in the story? The man goes through no less than 4 different looks in this one arc alone, keeping us on our toes just as much as he does the Quincy. In 3rd place, we have another character that undergoes something of a transformation in this arc. While not as drastic as Unohana's change, the new Captain Commander of the Gotei 13 and Captain of the 1st Division, Kyoraku Shinsui, still feels like a totally new character in the Thousand Year Blood War arc, and I'm all for it. Now, that's not to say I didn't like Kyoraku as he was presented prior to the final arc, I did, but his character is deepened to such a degree here that it really feels like some of Kubo's best ever character writing. It's almost as though there are 2 versions of Kyoraku, pre and post the Thousand Year Blood War arc. They are that different. You see, Kyoraku really steps up in the final arc. Once his father figure is killed early on, responsibility and the burden of leadership is thrust upon his shoulders. And even when he clearly doesn't want it, Kubo quickly establishes that Kyoraku is very good at it. Making him the head captain is a big move in the lore, but it does wonders for the character. Kyoraku takes on a much darker, more sinister vibe as he begins to make the big decisions necessary to help guide the Gotei 13 and the wider Soul Society through the biggest war of their time. His impact, then, is felt all over the arc, from Unohana's death to Zaraki's Shikai and, of course, Aizen's return. Kyoraku reminds me a little of Kisuke in this sense. His presence is felt from the beginning of the arc right the way through to the very end in a way that just never happens in the previous story arcs. Plus, Kyoraku caps off his arc with an in-depth flashback amidst one of the arc's biggest and best fights, which includes again his much-anticipated Bankai reveal. Kyoraku then kind of gets everything in the Thousand Year Blood War arc, and his character is elevated to incredible heights. From virtually every angle, he is one of the final arc's biggest winners, without a doubt. The runner-up, and in my opinion the second biggest winner of the Thousand Year Blood War arc, is the captain of the 11th Division and at long last, officially, the holder of the title of Kenpachi, Kenpachi Zaraki. Kubo does so much with Kenpachi in this arc, turning him into a genuinely interesting character with a fantastic journey that's somehow entirely confined to these final 200 chapters or so. When it comes to Kenpachi in the Thousand Year Blood War arc, I'm honestly astonished at how much Kubo was able to fit in. It feels like Kubo finally decided to lift the lid on him and make good on just about every tease, every possibility that's been built up before him over the years, and deliver in a big way. Not only does Kenpachi receive some surprising depth early on due to his relationship with Unohana and his history with her, but that battle results in him at last learning the name of his Zanpakuto. Perhaps one of the biggest paradigm shifts in the lore of the Gotei 13 since the start of the series. From there, Kenpachi's Shikai is revealed in glorious fashion as he decimates a meteor in the sky, but it's the character's growth that impressed me more. I love the solemn nature of his blunt discussion with Isane regarding Unohana's death and her legacy. I love the way he tries to teach Gremmy what it means to call yourself the strongest and what it means to enjoy a fight, and I love how even his immense care and worry for Yachiru is overturned in a confrontation with Nanao, when she asks him to consider where they need him the most in that moment. Like Mayuri, Kenpachi is at long last fighting for the Seireitei itself, and it's very refreshing to see. Despite his growth and seeming newfound sense of responsibility now that he is wearing the title of Kenpachi at last, the character does devolve a little bit during the battle with Gerard, and to be honest, I actually think Kenpachi's fights are perhaps the weakest aspect of his character in this arc. After finally killing Unohana, Kenpachi never truly wins another fight again on his own merit, which is weird and stifles his impact overall. But in terms of sheer spectacle, there's nothing quite like learning Kenpachi's Shikai and Bankai in the exact same arc and watching him topple a divine giant as a rampaging demon is a delight. Kubo took a bit of a gamble with Kenpachi, removing what made him truly unique among the captains and hoping the payoff would be worth it. In my opinion, it is. Watching Kenpachi at last learn Nozarashi's name and then continue to grow throughout the arc is great development for a character who at one point felt pretty played out. By throwing open the door, Kubo showed that there was plenty of life left in him yet. But my number one pick for the biggest winner of the Thousand Year Blood War arc, at least the 2024 edition, feels obvious. And really, could it be anyone else? No one had the same meteoric impact, no single character achieved as much, and no one drove the plot forwards like the Emperor of the Vandenreich himself, Yuha Buck. It's honestly weird to think that Yuha Buck himself only exists in Bleach for the final 200 chapters. These days, he's ubiquitous in Bleach discourse. So many of our debates, conversations, and discussions revolve around or involve him in some way, shape, or form. He's just that important. Yuha Buck emerged in the final arc of Bleach as a staggeringly tall figure of importance, totally dominating the arc and making it his own. Unlike Aizen, who was a notably passive antagonist for the most part in comparison, Yuha Buck is very proactive, driving the conflict at every turn. His impact is felt in every corner of the arc. Virtually every massive event involves him in some way, whether it's his initial invasion of the Soul Society and the brutal killing of Yamamoto, to his trampling of the Royal Palace and the murder of Reo. Yuha Buck arrives with only 200 chapters to go, and yet completely reshapes the world of Bleach, both literally and figuratively. For the most part, I think Kubo totally nailed it with Yuha Buck's character. Sure, a little more foreshadowing to his existence might have been nice, and I think the character loses something after absorbing the Soul King, but generally speaking, he was everything he needed to be, and more. Kubo tied him into the lore in an expert way, on scales both massive and personal. Yuha Buck feels truly like an enemy of the Soul Society, of the Gotei 13, but his reach, his influence is vast, and he's impacted even Ichigo himself on an intimate level, being the cause of Masaki's death and the true nature of Old Man Zangetsu himself. All of this is to say that despite his very late appearance, Yuha Buck sends shockwaves rippling through the lore of Bleach, totally turning the story and world on its head. Simply put, it's honestly hard to imagine the story of Bleach without him anymore, but yes, there was a time before Yuha Buck, quite a lot of time in fact. But moving forward, I have no doubt that the Quincy King's influence will continue to be felt for years to come. Perhaps we could have enjoyed a little more of his history on some of his ancient relationships, but the anime looks set to deepen that well considerably, providing some much needed context to both Yuha Buck and the war he perpetuates. Even without it though, there's no denying that Yuha Buck is the biggest winner of the 1000-Year Blood War arc. He's a larger-than-life character, crashing into the story with incredible impact and staying there for a solid 20 volumes or so. He kind of has it all: immense screen presence and loads of time with the audience, a few great fights, and a colossal impact on the narrative. The arc essentially moves according to Yuha Buck's will, and that's true power. Now, when I made this list 3 years ago, I didn't include any new characters for whatever reason. This version feels like a much more complete representation of who really stands out in the arc to me. But that's it for the video, guys. As always, I really hope you enjoyed it. Let me know down in the comments below who you think the biggest winners of the 1000-Year Blood War arc are. I'd love to see if you agree with any of my picks, or if there are any names you feel I forgot to add. Do please let me know down in the comments below, and let me know as well if you think we should follow this up with a biggest losers of the 1000-Year Blood War arc 2024 edition. I'd love to hear your thoughts on all of that down in the comments below. As always, I want to end the video by saying a massive thank you and giving a huge shout out to my supporters over on Patreon. As always, I really do appreciate each and every one of you so very much. And if you like what I do here on YouTube, you too can support me over on Patreon as well, to get your name in the credits just like this, and to get every single video I release absolutely ad-free. Alright, but guys, make sure to subscribe if you're new here. Until next time, I'll catch you later, and I'll see you then.